The sun had barely risen when Chief Marcus Grant stepped onto his back porch, cradling a steaming cup of coffee in his large, callous hands. The quiet hum of the neighborhood greeted him. Birds chirping, distant lawnmowers humming, and the occasional bark from a restless dog. It was his only moment of peace before the weight of his badge settled on his shoulders. Then, a sound cut through the tranquility. A metallic scrape. The distinct clatter of something heavy being dragged. Marcus's brows furrowed. Years in law enforcement had sharpened his instincts, and something about that noise sent an immediate warning through his gut. He placed his coffee on the porch railing and stepped down onto the lawn, his boots pressing into the dewy grass. As he rounded the corner of his house, the sight before him made him stop in his tracks. A woman, mid-40s, platinum blonde hair, and an aggressively tight ponytail, designer sunglasses perched on her nose, was struggling to load his high-end lawnmower onto the back of a shiny white SUV. His lawnmower. She grunted, cursing under her breath as she heaved it up the ramp, clearly underestimating its weight. Marcus folded his arms. "You need help with that?" The woman jolted, her grip slipping. The lawnmower rolled back down with a thud. She turned, startled, but the moment she saw him, her lips curled into a smirk. "Oh, I thought no one lived here anymore." Her voice was coated in artificial sweetness, the kind Marcus had heard too many times before, fake practiced, the kind that meant trouble. He took a slow step forward, keeping his expression unreadable. "That's so." She gestured vaguely toward his house. "It's been so quiet, and, well, I saw this just sitting out here. Thought it was abandoned." His patience thinned. "That's funny, because I was using it yesterday." A flicker of annoyance crossed her face, but she masked it quickly. She adjusted her sunglasses, lifting her chin. "Well, I mean, it's just sitting there. No harm in repurposing something that's not being used." Marcus let out a slow breath, his fingers twitching toward his phone. "Lady, that's not repurposing. That's stealing." Her smile faltered, replaced by something sharper. "Oh, don't be dramatic. It's a lawnmower. Besides, I'm part of the Neighborhood Beautification Committee. I thought I was doing a favor." Marcus didn't move, didn't blink. He'd dealt with liars, con artists, and criminals who spun better stories than this. "Return it. Now." She scoffed, crossing her arms. "You don't have to be so aggressive." Aggressive? The words settled between them like bait on a hook. Marcus had seen it before. The way people like her wielded language like a weapon, shaping the narrative before it even had a chance to form. His voice remained calm. "I'm asking you to step away from my property." "Karen." Because, of course, she had to be a Karen. Let out a dramatic sigh, rolling her eyes behind those oversized shades. "You know, you don't have to be rude. I was trying to be nice. People like you always—" She cut herself off. Marcus caught the way her expression flickered. Hesitation, calculation, and then something cruel slithering behind her smirk. He'd seen it too many times to count. She reached into her pocket. He tensed. Then he saw the phone. And she was already dialing. 911, what's your emergency? "Yes, hi." Karen's voice transformed, taking on a breathless, tearful edge. "There's a man in my neighborhood. He's being aggressive. He's threatening me. I think he has a weapon." Marcus exhaled through his nose. There it was. The script, the performance, the weaponization of fear. She clutched her phone like a lifeline, eyes flicking toward him as if waiting for him to react, to lash out, to give her something she could use. Instead, he stayed silent. A beat passed, then another. She lowered her phone slightly, just enough to peek over at him, lips twitching when she saw he wasn't rattled. "Don't you have anything to say for yourself?" she taunted. Marcus tilted his head. "Nope." A flicker of uncertainty passed over her face, but before she could say anything else, the distant wail of sirens filled the air. The cavalry had arrived. Karen's confidence reignited. She straightened, shoulders back, righteous fury replacing her fake fear. "Oh!" "You're in trouble now," she gloated. "You should have just walked away." Marcus finally allowed himself a small smirk. He wasn't worried. Not even a little. The patrol car screeched to a halt in front of Marcus's house, their flashing lights bathing the quiet suburban street in red and blue. Neighbors peeked through their curtains, some stepping onto their porches with curious eyes, drawn by the unmistakable scent of trouble. Karen stood tall, her phone still clutched in her manicured hand, her face a masterpiece of righteous indignation. The moment the first officer stepped out, she launched into a dramatic performance, gesturing wildly in Marcus's direction. "Oh, thank God you're here," she gasped, voice quivering. He threatened me. He was so aggressive, and I was terrified for my life. He was trying to—" She hesitated, as if searching for the right words to make herself the perfect victim. "He was trying to intimidate me, and when I told him to stop, he got even worse." Marcus didn't move. He stood with his arms relaxed at his sides, watching as the officers approached. The lead officer, a young guy with a tight grip on his holster, looked between Marcus and Karen, assessing the situation. "Sir," the officer started, eyes narrowing, "what exactly is going on here?" Karen didn't give him a chance to answer. "He was trying to steal my property. I caught him red-handed, and when I confronted him, he became hostile. You need to arrest him." Marcus arched a brow, glancing at his own lawnmower still half hanging out of Karen's SUV. The officer turned to him. "Sir, do you live here?" Marcus met his gaze, then reached into his pocket. The movement made the young officer tense, but Marcus remained unbothered. He pulled out his wallet, flipped it open, and held up a badge. The officer's face paled. "Chief Marcus Grant," he said, his voice steady. "This is my house. That's my lawnmower. And this woman is trying to steal it." A thick silence fell over the scene. Karen's smirk wavered. The young officer swallowed hard. You're Chief Grant." Marcus nodded. The officer's eyes darted to Karen, who was suddenly fidgeting, her confidence cracking. She blinked rapidly, processing the turn of events, but stubbornness flared in her expression. "Well, how was I supposed to know that?" she stammered, adjusting her sunglasses. "He wasn't wearing a uniform. He didn't act like a police officer." Marcus exhaled slowly, the patience he'd held on to slipping. "I don't need to wear a uniform for you to know not to steal from my property." Karen scoffed, shaking her head as if she were the one being wronged. "This is ridiculous. I was just trying to take care of the neighborhood. You're blowing this out of proportion." The young officer looked at Marcus, then at Karen and sighed. He gestured toward the lawnmower. "Ma'am, did you take this from his property?" Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. "It wasn't his property per se. It was outside." "Ma'am." The officer's voice hardened. "Yes or no?" She faltered. I was just... Yes or no?" Her jaw clenched. She glared at Marcus as if he were the one forcing her into a corner. Finally, she huffed. "Fine. Yes. But I told you I thought it was abandoned." The officer sighed again, rubbing his temples. "Ma'am, that's still theft." Karen's entire demeanor changed. She gasped, stepping back as if he had slapped her. "Excuse me?" Marcus watched with mild amusement as she switched tactics, her eyes welling up with fake tears. "You can't seriously be accusing me of stealing. I'm a respected member of this community. I organize the neighborhood watch. I bake for the school fundraisers. This is just a misunderstanding." Marcus chuckled under his breath. He'd seen hardened criminals put on better performances. "Ma'am," the officer said, his patience clearly waning, "we have an attempted theft here and a false police report. That's serious." Karen's panic spiked. She turned her desperate eyes to the gathering crowd, hoping for support, but the neighbors watching had already begun whispering amongst themselves. Some shook their heads. Others smirked. The tide was turning, and Karen knew it. Her gaze snapped back to Marcus, burning with frustration. "You're doing this on purpose. You're trying to humiliate me." Marcus tilted his head, No, you did that all by yourself. She opened her mouth to argue, but the reality of her situation was finally sinking in. The officers weren't taking her side. The neighbors weren't rushing to defend her. She was standing alone, exposed, and the power she thought she had was slipping through her fingers. The young officer glanced at Marcus. "Chief, do you want to press charges?" Marcus let the question hang in the air, savoring the way Karen tensed. The weight of consequences settled on her shoulders, her defiance cracking under the realization that she had lost. He considered it, really considered it. Then he exhaled through his nose. "No," he said finally. "I don't need to waste time on someone like her." Karen looked relieved, until he took a step closer, his voice dropping just low enough for only her to hear. "But if you ever set foot on my property again, or so much as breathe my name in another fake 911 call, I will press charges, and I'll make sure they stick." Her face went sheet white. Marcus didn't wait for a response. He turned to the officers. "Escort her off my property." The officers nodded, guiding Karen away as she sputtered in protest. The moment her SUV pulled off, the street fell into an eerie silence. Then a slow, appreciative clap broke out from a neighbor across the street. Then another, and another. Soon, the whole block was applauding. Marcus shook his head, a smirk tugging at his lips. He hadn't needed revenge. Karen had taken care of that all on her own. The dust had barely settled from Karen's dramatic exit when Marcus finally let out a long breath, shaking his head. His neighbors, still buzzing with excitement, began dispersing back into their homes, though a few stragglers lingered, throwing him knowing smirks and murmuring to each other. Some of them had probably been waiting for someone to put Karen in her place for years. Marcus picked up the lawnmower, rolling it back into his garage. He should have been furious, but instead, there was a strange sense of satisfaction. He had encountered all kinds of criminals in his years as police chief, hardened gang members, white-collar frauds, and even corrupt officials. But Karen's breed of arrogance was something else entirely. She truly believed she was untouchable, that the rules applied to everyone but her. He locked the garage, dusted off his hands, and was just about to head inside when his phone buzzed in his pocket. Pulling out, he saw a text from an unknown number. "Unknown, I hope you know you made a huge mistake. You have no idea who you're messing with." Marcus smirked, shaking his head. It was adorable, really. Even after being caught red-handed, Karen still thought she had leverage. Ignoring the text, he walked inside, kicked off his shoes, and grabbed a cold bottle of water from the fridge. He had barely taken a sip before his work phone buzzed. An officer from his department was calling. Marcus sighed, answering with professional tone. "Chief Grant." Sir, we have a bit of situation." The officer's voice held a hesitant edge. Marcus rubbed his temple. "What kind of situation?" "Well, a woman just came into the station demanding to file a complaint. Says she was harassed, intimidated, and unfairly targeted. She claims you abused your position as police chief." Marcus nearly laughed. "Let me guess. Blonde? Mid-40s? Think she's a queen of suburbia." A pause. Then, "Yeah, that sounds about right." Marcus exhaled through his nose, setting his water bottle down. "And I assume she conveniently left out the part where she tried to steal my property and made a false 911 call." "Oh, absolutely," the officer said. "She's spinning a whole story about how you threatened her and used your badge to bully her. She even mentioned taking this to the media if we don't act." That piqued Marcus's interest. He had no doubt Karen thought she could twist the narrative. After all, privileged people like her had a history of weaponizing the system. But what she failed to realize was that Marcus wasn't just some random officer she could push around. He was the system. "Let her talk," Marcus said smoothly. "Take her statement. Make sure everything's on record. And don't interrupt her. Let her dig her own grave." The officer chuckled. "Got it. And what do you want us to do after?" "Once she's done, pull up the body cam footage from the officers at my house. Show her the part where she admitted to stealing my lawnmower. There was a beat of silence. Then a low whistle. Oh, she's going to hate that. Marcus smirked. She'll either leave on her own or keep pushing until she forces our hand. Either way, she's in for a reality check. Hanging up, he leaned back against the counter, contemplating just how deep Karen would dig her hole. Women like her rarely knew when to quit, and he was right. An hour later, he received another call, this time from his department's legal team. Karen had officially tried to file charges against him. Marcus drove down to the station, walking through the doors with a kind of commanding presence that made younger officers stand a little straighter. He nodded at a few familiar faces before making his way to the observation room. Through the one-way glass, he saw Karen sitting in an interview chair, her arms crossed tightly, her foot tapping with impatience. One of his officers sat across from her, calm and professional. "Ma'am, we've reviewed the footage from the responding officer's body cams, and it clearly shows you admitting to taking the lawn mower." Karen's expression flickered for a second before she plastered on a fake, wounded look. "I already told you. I thought it was abandoned. I wasn't stealing. That's not fair." The officer didn't flinch. "That's not how property laws work, ma'am. Taking something that doesn't belong to you without permission is theft, and making a false police report is a criminal offense." Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. Marcus decided it was time to step in. He pushed open the door, the sound making Karen whip her head around. The moment she saw him, her face twisted with barely concealed rage. "You!" she hissed, standing up. "This is all your fault. You're trying to ruin my reputation." Marcus met her fury with nothing but calm indifference. "No, Karen, you did that to yourself." She jabbed a finger at him. "I demand that you apologize and drop all of this nonsense. I'll have you know that my husband has connections. If you don't—" Marcus raised a hand, cutting her off. "I don't care who your husband is." His voice was steady, unshaken. "Here's the reality of the situation. You committed a crime. You got caught. And now, instead of taking accountability, you're trying to manipulate your way out of it." Karen's lip curled. "You have no proof." Marcus arched a brow. "Actually, I do. Not just the body cam footage, but also your statement here at the station. And the fact that you keep doubling down is only making it worse for you." Karen's confidence wavered. For the first time, real panic flashed in her eyes. Marcus leaned in slightly, his tone turning colder. "Now, here's what's going to happen. You can either walk out of here right now, go home, and never pull a stunt like this again, or you can keep pushing your luck, and I'll make sure you face real consequences. Your call." Karen's throat bobbed as she swallowed. She wanted to fight. He could see it in the way her hands clenched at her sides. But deep down, she knew she had lost. Finally, with a huff, she grabbed her purse off the chair and stormed past him, muttering under her breath. Marcus watched her go, waiting until the station doors swung shut behind her before turning to his officer. "Bet you $10 she tries to play the victim on Facebook before the day's over." The officer snorted. "No bet. That's a guarantee." Marcus chuckled, shaking his head. He had seen plenty of entitled people in his career, but Karen was in a league of her own. Still, the message had been sent loud and clear. This was his town, and no amount of privilege was going to change that.